Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing great. I'm doing very well, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight, where we've got Lucinda having to book in to a very creepy hotel, which sounds like something out of a horror movie, so we're about to find out what's going to happen there. So let's continue with part 2 of our story. When a predator was lightly on your trail, you did the antithesis of what they expected you to do. So Lucinda dragged her suitcase down the corridor, up a bright orange tacky-looking wrought iron staircase, up 2 more flights of stairs. She huffed and puffed from exhaustion. Had the motel not considered fixing their broken-down lift, or was that just too much to ask? The motel looked like something that had been around since the early 60s, and was stuck in a time warp, slowly groaning under the lack of attention it had received from not being modernized or brought up to date. Yes, it had been painted. Yes, its fixtures and fittings, although obsolete, had been repaired. But the entire building looked run down, shabby, sordid and outdated, almost as ancient as Uncle Otis's suitcase, which was now, it would seem, in jolly good company. The only difference was Uncle Otis's suitcase had a vintage charm about it, and this motel had about as much personality as a moth-eared teddy bear that had seen better days. It was a nightmare getting her suitcase up those flights of steps, but she finally succeeded. With a mottled gladness in her heart, she reached the shabby motel door with the scuffed numbers 313 engraved in the wood. Her heart began swinging heavily in her chest, like a vacillating pendulum that can't decide whether to give you a yes or no answer. She drew in a deep, reluctant breath as she slowly plunged the key in the lock. Could she dare to open the room? She stood there for a brief moment outside the door, trembling in her boots. A man in the motel room next door to hers hurriedly opened the door, emerging like a cuckoo from a clock, with only one object in his mind, and that was to lecherously ogle the occupant moving into the motel room next door to his, which he was glad to see appeared to be an attractive young woman. He did not disguise his pleasure on laying his eyes over Lucinda like a hungry Komodo dragon. How many creeps were in this place, Lucinda privately wondered to herself. They seemed to be practically crawling out of the woodwork everywhere she looked, like termites. The odious wanton man stood in the doorway, his huge naked belly hanging low down over his pants, at the level where you would have had a halty if you were carrying a gun. A smouldering cigarette dangled from one of his fat grubby fingers, stained yellow from nicotine. He was breathing heavily, as if it had been a major effort to leave his sofa just to get to the door. He stared at Lucinda lustfully, giving her the once-over with amorous dark eyes that left you in no doubt what he was thinking. "Very nice," he grunted appreciatively, giving Lucinda the once-over. "Very nice. My name is Rev. I've been here for 4 weeks. The wife kicked me out of my own house. Got a restraining order against me, she did. Can you believe that? The old battle-axe didn't deserve a man like me. I was good to her, you know. But did she see that? No, she did not. She was a fool for kicking me out. I know how to treat a woman right, I do. Would you like to come in for a beer? I could order pizza if you like. I know how to show an attractive woman like yourself a very good time." Lucinda mumbled something under her breath like, "No thanks," and ignored the grubby man's leering advances and prurient gaze, wishing with all her heart that he'd put some clothes on. Did he not realize how dreadful he looked, going around the place half naked? It wasn't exactly a pretty look. She hurriedly plunged the key in the lock to escape the lewd man, who rather reminded her of a bloated cockroach you'd seriously love to squash under your boot if given the chance or opportunity. "Lecherous creep," she said under her breath, as he called after her again. "If you change your mind, miss, you know where I am," he said, giving her a gormless grin. Lucinda was surprised that this seedy motel was a beehive of activity for lowlives, like the degenerate Mr. Blobby from next door. And now she was going to stay in a room where the last customer had left in a body bag, after his body had decomposed on a bed for an entire week, before he was finally discovered. Was this place for real? How did that even happen? Had it really taken that long for anyone to recognize the odious bad smell, before someone finally reported it to the manager? If indeed what the motel manager had told her was true. But then why would he have lied to her about such a macabre thing? You couldn't make stuff like this up, could you? The motel manager looked like he had the imagination of a maggot, and had probably left school at the age of 14. Maybe he was warped and got his decrepit kicks out of scaring the patrons half to death, by feeding their imaginations with horrifying imagery, which was hard to shake off, once it stuck to your mind like a rancid chewing gum. This motel was made out of the fabric of your very worst, most disturbing nightmares. And Universal Studios, if they wanted to step up their game in the motion picture industry, they'd do well to replicate a place like this for a horror movie, if they wanted to create the kind of ambience that would make their viewers tremble in their boots. Lucinda was certainly uneasy on entering the motel room, as a feeling of trepidation hung around her like a choker chain. The first thing that Lucinda checked, of course, on entering the motel room after placing Grandpa Otis's suitcase on the luggage rack, was to quickly inspect the lonely-looking mattresses on both the beds, covered in cheap bed linen. The mattresses on the twin-set pair of beds were both brand new, which lent weight to the motel manager's story, as the previous mattress would likely have been disposed of by law as hazardous waste material. It would be illegal to have a contaminated mattress seeping with body fluids from a decomposing corpse in a motel room. It was clear that even the carpet in the room had been replaced, and so had the unsightly white curtains. But the room was desolate and depressing looking, smelling of fresh paint. The pedestrian nondescript motel room brought new meaning to the word beige. Lucinda almost felt the tug of loneliness of the man that had died in this room, as if he was watching her from the shadows, basking in his own lugubrious melancholia, and maybe not even realizing he was actually dead. What if he was still here? She thought, looking around the motel room, almost as if half expecting to see a dark shadow trespassing across the walls. This disquieting thought filled her with horror. Just thinking about the deceased man that had died in this motel room made her skin recoil in disgust, and it was as if the lingering odour of his noxious decomposing corpse still permeated the air, even if it was long since gone. Maybe this motel room held an indelible, repugnant footprint of this man's death within its four walls, that no amount of bleach or refurbishing could ever shift. Did they not say that places held on to traumatic memories, like signatures, that became ingrained into the energy of a place? It was possible, Lucinda thought. She promptly thrust open the window as wide as she could, inviting in a cool breeze that filtered through the room, knocking about the curtains against the walls, like the billowing sails of a boat. A tense feeling of panic overcame her. Her chest tightened, so that she could hardly breathe. Her heart began to race in her chest. Lucinda was no stranger to panic attacks. She knew exactly what she was experiencing, for this had happened to her before. Breathe, she told herself. Push your stomach out. Breathe in. Pull your stomach in. Breathe out. And then the panic will subside. It's all in the breathing. Once Lucinda had managed to calm down, and her heartbeat had slowed, she took in the motel room through discriminating eyes. It was about as bland and as nondescript as you could get, with cream walls, cream curtains that hung limply from the windows like unkempt eyebrows framing a pair of dull, soulless eyes on a colourless white mannequin's face. The bed linen was white, and the only colour in the entire room was a tacky-looking hideous lime-green bed cover, and a couple of brown cushions. Then there were about 3 pictures on the walls, all of very drab desert-like scenes, consisting of cactuses. It was uninspiring and insipid. One thing was for certain. the designer of this motel room, had about as much taste and imagination as a bag lady carrying a trolley of her worldly possessions down Madison Avenue, New York. It could have been worse, of course, she told herself. At least I'm lying on a brand new mattress that is not heavily soiled, and the room has been freshly painted. How she wished that the creepy motel manager, suitably calling himself Roach, had not told her about the dead man, and then this room would not be half so bad. It was the ominous, rather harrowing thought of the dead corpse lying on a bed in the room that brought on a shuddersome attack of the heebie-jeebies for Lucinda. I need to get out of here, she thought, glancing at her sorry reflection in the mirror as an afterthought. The less than glamorous image that stared back at her she barely recognized. She had been pretty once, but the last year had rudely leached the beauty from her face, like a heavy-weight drain cleaner, and the black bags under her eyes tactlessly spoke of many a sleepless night. If she was going to ask for a job around here, she needed to look halfway respectable, and right now, in her shabby jeans, with their trendy fashionable ladders around the knee area, and the scruffy-looking white T-shirt she was wearing, she really did not look her very best. It didn't help that her greasy dyed blonde shoulder-length hair was begging for a shampoo, and probably was smelling of petrol fumes from the Greyhound bus. She looked more like something disgracefully unmentionable that the cat had dragged in. Lucinda hurriedly stepped into the brand-new shower cubicle that had also been refitted only recently. She sighed with relief when the hot water jetted over her body, like an obstreperous waterfall. She indulgently bathed appreciatively in its warmth, as if washing away the sweaty debris of her soiled life. And finally, after abandoning the shower and drying herself off, she slipped into a pair of comfortable, elegant, flared black trousers, along with a white blouse, and put her feet into a flat pair of comfortable corked sandals. Then she put a splash of Misty Orr perfume around her neck, and tied her slightly damp towel-dried blonde hair away from her face, in a neat ponytail, to give herself a no-nonsense honourable look. She emphasized her alluring green eyes with a touch of kohl pencil, and added a smidgen of nude lipstick to her lips to bring a splash of colour to her washed-out appearance that looked as forsaken and as desolate as the Montana countryside itself. It would seem the landscape had wilfully engaged in a bright season of parting, with resplendent leafy ensembles, ablaze with showers of golds, russets, and reds, that were now being confiscated by the formidable hands of the forthcoming winter, that was demanding autumn to stop showing off and to dispose of her finery, like a mischievous teenager who'd been out and about too much, painting the town red, and was being reprimanded by her parents. Now everything looked defeated, tired, haggard, and weary. It was hardly a wonder that piles of fallen leaves pillowed themselves magnanimously on the sides of the road, as autumn had given up the ghost, and was finally surrendering to the demands that the cold season invited. Lucinda was eager to leave the claustrophobic confines of the motel room, that was inviting her to dwell on some discomposing thoughts that she was far too fatigued to allow herself to entertain. The long road trip on the Greyhound bus had sucked the life out of her, but some light exercise might help her get an even better night's sleep, as her legs felt stiff from being seated in the same squat position in the back of the bus, and even as she walked, her muscles ached. She had chosen to take a light breather, walking down the street in town on a bustling, busy Friday night. Her cork sandals clattered noisily against the asphalt paving of the sidewalk. Some of the tall, lanky trees, planted within the confines of the paving, began to whisper in the breeze, the cool air provoking their few remaining leaves to rustle and the boughs to shake, so that even a couple of abandoned chip packets floated down the sidewalk in good company with some crisp autumn leaves. And in a strange way, the crinkling litter as it moved almost looked beautiful in the soft, mellow, rather flattering light of the street lamps. Lucinda had been gagging for fresh air, after having spent far too long in that miserably oppressive, sticky atmosphere of a cloying greyhound bus, with a dodgy air conditioning system that didn't appear to be working terribly well. Either that or the dishonest driver didn't want to turn it on and pretended it was giving him problems. And then to boot, arriving at a very unsavoury motel room with a less than desirable next-door neighbour had been far from welcoming. How she wished with all her heart she had a ubiquitous amount of money, as staying in a luxurious hotel would feel marvellously good. But beggars could not be choosers. She knew she had put the huge envelope of cash into her shoulder bag, after taking a sizable amount of money out of her bank account. She had subsequently turned her account into an interest-gaining account that could not be touched for the next few years. She had left her best friend Sammy a note saying, "I'm sorry about leaving you in the lurch like this with the rent, but I enclose enough cash to keep you covered for the next 3 months, until you find a suitable new flatmate. I know I'm in danger, Sammy," she had written. "You were right about being careful about choosing my friends. I messed up big time. As you know, I'm the reason Robin is in jail. As a consequence, I'm being followed by Wasp. He knows what I did, and that I'm responsible for getting Robin locked up. His girlfriend tells me that Wasp is going to kill me. I was good friends with her. She knows Wasp means business. I'm not sure the police are in a position to protect me. I can't tell you where I'm going, for your own safety, of course. Love you, Lucinda." It would seem while she'd slept in the Greyhound bus, someone had stolen that envelope containing all her money from her shoulder bag. I mean, of all the unlucky things to happen, the losing of this sizable stash of money was an infelicious kick in the guts. She had fought the urge to stay awake in the Greyhound bus, she rarely had, to ensure that something like this did not happen. But the rocking motion of the bus had sent her off into a deep sleep, and it was only when she climbed off the bus and had gingerly inspected her handbag she had discovered that not only was her leather purse missing, but her manila envelope of cash had also been stolen. Luckily she'd found some stray cash notes stashed in the back pocket of her shoulder bag, or she really would be in a sizable pickle. She knew at once who had stolen her money. She had chosen an inconspicuous seat close to the back of the bus, where she sincerely hoped she would not be noticed, but a while later a grubby-looking woman that reminded her of a gypsy, as she wore a full, long, flowing skirt and a black crocheted shawl, and both her hands were covered in hundreds of jangling bangles. The woman had asked her if the seat next to her was occupied, and Lucinda, who couldn't lie, had said no, it wasn't. So the woman had promptly sat down right next to her, having chosen not to occupy one of the other seats that was still empty. Had this been part of her cunning ploy? Was the sly woman a frequent traveller on Greyhound buses, looking for an easy target? And had she seen Lucinda coming, like a cat on the trail of a mouse? The woman certainly had furtive brown eyes, and had given Lucinda a shy, bashful, reluctant smile. Lucinda had half expected the woman to offer to read her palm, but she had been quiet and rather timorous the entire journey, and not said a single word, giving nothing away. Lucinda had privately deduced the woman was harmless, but it seemed she had slippery fingers. She suspected when she'd fallen fast asleep, the woman's grubby hands had been ferreting around in her bag, like a couple of raccoons in a dumpster. It was amazing she hadn't heard the commotion, with all the bangles she was wearing. She could, of course, report the lamentable incident of theft to the police, but that would draw unwanted, unambiguous attention to her presence in the small town, and that was the last thing she wanted to do. The absence of money in her life meant she had to settle for measly leftovers, like the cubs in a lion pack, after the male lion has eaten his fill of the choicest prime meat, leaving scant offerings for the others in the pack. On this evening, with the sounds of crickets and frogs trilling in the air, a crescent moon was hanging low in an inky black sky that was glittering with bright stars. Yes, Lucinda had lost her money. Yes, she was staying in a dreadfully inauspicious motel room, with not so pleasant a history, but at least she was alive and well, and that was something to be grateful for in the grand scheme of things. For a moment she was all but a solitary figure, sashaying down the sidewalk, walking past a collection of eclectic-looking shops, a baker's, a butcher's, a grocer, a clothes boutique, a nail bar, a sandwich shop, a donut shop, and so much more. She could hear the merry laughter of people's voices trilling in the background, like a cheery sequence of orchestral notes. She could smell barbecue grill and melted cheese filtering in the air, reminding Lucinda of how hungry she actually was. She noticed there were many robust, powerfully built-looking SUVs parked in the parking bay. Then she saw a few couples holding hands, purposefully drifting into a couple of bars and diners. It was clear the townsfolk here were making the most of this Friday evening, all thoroughly enjoying the pleasing fragrance that the weekend invited, including late sleep-ins and Sunday afternoon barbecues with friends. It was the pink neon sign of a pig with writing on the inside that flashed grill that caught Lucinda's immediate attention. She was drawn to the light like a moth. She would apply for a job in here, she thought, and request only cash in hand as payment. She was overcome with a nervous, rather timorous trepidation. She knew that many small towns had a reputation of being decidedly cliquey and very close-knit, and not terribly welcoming or warm towards strangers. There was more than a 90% chance, she thought, that the manager of the Pig and Grill would likely turn her away. You never got anywhere in life with a defeatist mentality. You needed to plunge into the deep end with a steely grit and determination. That's what Grandpa Otis would always say to her. If you don't take risks, Lucinda, my dear, then you will never triumph in life. From every triumph came the seed of risk, but nothing was ever seeded without the involvement of risk. It is the catalyst from which all successes are born. She could hear him now, as he sucked in his cigar, blowing out aromatic smoke, and staring at her through his grey-rimmed spectacles that brought out the steely grey colour of his eyes. "You can do it, my dear," said her grandfather's voice in her head. "I have faith in you, love." "Thanks, Grandpa Otis," she whispered under her breath, as she clenched her fists together tightly. "I'm doing this for you, Grandpa." Lucinda's back straightened. She gingerly opened the glass door of the Pig and Grill, entering the bustling diner. She was greeted by a young waitress with a menu in her hand, asking her whether she'd like a table. "Welcome to the Pig and Grill. Is there only one of you dining with us tonight?" "No, I'm here not to dine," she said. "I'm actually here to inquire about a waitressing job." The young woman pulled a face. "You're not from around here, are you?" she said sympathetically, her eyes studying Lucinda curiously. "No, I'm not," Lucinda admitted. The waitress blew out a bubble of chewing gum that splattered against her face, but she collected the dregs of her gum impressively with her tongue and began chewing again, looking pensively reflectful, as if thinking about something rather seriously. "To be honest with you, people around here are very biased. They don't like hiring strangers, if you know what I mean. There's an inverted loyalty around here. It's not personal, of course. We just look after our own, that's all. I'll get my father, Mr. Alec Cowslipper, to have a word with you. I'm not sure if he's looking for staff at the moment, but he's different compared to the folks around here. He might just give you a chance, but don't bet on it. My name's Gina, by the way. Gina Cowslipper," she said. "Thanks, Gina," said Lucinda. "I do appreciate it." "No biggie," said Gina, blowing out another bubble of gum. "I'm glad to help if I can, but no promises. So don't get your hopes up. Your name is?" "Lucinda," said Lucinda, "but you can call me Lou for short. If Lucinda's too much of a mouthful, that is." "Be back in a tick," said Gina, disappearing into the swinging doors of the kitchen diner, where she might as well have been gone for hours, because the minutes seemed like a lifetime to Lucinda, who sensed the voices from the patrons in the diner had slowly died, as eyes began to scrutinize her from tables. She felt as if she'd become the life study in an art class. Why was everybody looking at her? Why wouldn't they stop staring? She suddenly felt so conspicuous, as if she was on show, but she pretended not to notice the curious interest that she had obviously galvanized. Moments later a large, muscular-looking man emerged from the kitchen, and although he was all brawn, Lucinda liked him at once, for he had very kind eyes. She guessed he was in his late 40s or early 50s, but his dark hair was peppered with grey. It was thick and curly around his face. His skin was olive in colour, and his greenish hazel eyes were warm and friendly. "Hello there," said Alec Cowslipper, giving Lucinda a friendly grin. "Sorry about keeping you waiting. It's pandemonium tonight, I'm afraid, as it is on every Friday night. It's all hands on deck. Hundreds of orders for the chef tonight, who's unfortunately in a rather cantankerous mood because his wife is refusing to have another baby with him, and he wants a football field of children. So he's been cursing, and I've been trying to calm him down so that the hamburgers will actually land on people's plates and not be airborne like flying saucers." "As bad as that?" asked Lucinda, smiling. "I'm afraid so," said Mr. Cowslipper. "You don't know the half of what goes on around here. You could actually write novels about this place. You are Lucinda, I believe. My daughter's Gina. She says you're looking for work." In the background, the friendly orchestral notes of the diner resumed, almost as if a radio had been turned back on, after a brief silence. You could hear the clattering and clanging noises of cutlery, the tinkling of glasses, the background drawl of cheerful people's voices, and every few seconds the swinging doors of the kitchen would pop open, and a waiter with a generous plate of steaming, delicious food, served up with heaps of fries and onion rings, would emerge from the kitchen. The place was buzzing with a leisurely upbeat euphoria that only a Friday night would bring. "That's right," said Lucinda. "I'd like a waitressing job, but I'm willing to pretty much do anything, with only one stipulation. I want to be paid in cash." "I see," said Alec Cowslipper, rubbing his chin and looking thoughtful. "I can see you're new in town. I've never seen you before." "That's right. I'm just hoping you have a job for me. I can do anything, and I'm a hard worker. I really need this job. Cards on the table. I'm desperate for work," she said obsequiously. Alec looked at her attentively. "What brings you to a place like this? You can tell me to mind my own business. But are you running away from your old life? Is that what this is about?" Alec Cowslipper's candid comments took Lucinda aback. She almost trembled in her boots. "How do you know?" she asked. "Am I that transparent?" "It's the look in your face, young lady. My sister had the very same look, you know, when she ran away from a scary boyfriend of hers. I'd know that look anywhere. I was not intending to hire anyone, but based on what you're telling me, and the fact that you need cash in hand, I would gladly help, as long as you can promise me one thing, and that is you're not running from the police." "Oh, I assure you absolutely not," said Lucinda. "My issue is far more domesticated." "Good. Well, if that be the case, you're employed. You can start tomorrow for the lunch hour shift. I'll see you then." All of a sudden, a slightly plump woman wearing a flowery dress hurried towards them. "Oh, Mr. Cowslipper," she said. She sounded rather out of breath. "I was just wondering if you've got some Tylenol for me. I've suddenly come over with a thunderous headache. It's booming in my head." Alec Cowslipper grinned knowingly at Mrs. Petticock. He knew exactly why the town busybody was pretending to have a dreadful headache. That woman never missed a trick. She had noticed him talking to the new arrival in town, and wanted to know absolutely everything about her, and her fictitious headache seemed like a great excuse. "Who might you be?" asked Mrs. Petticock, looking directly at Lucinda through her inquiring brown eyes. "You're not from around here, are you? I've never seen you before." "No, I'm not," Lucinda replied tentatively, feeling marginally uncomfortable under the woman's brazen scrutiny. "She's new in town," said Mr. Cowslipper. "Lucinda, meet Maya Petticock. Lucinda here is going to start working at our diner. Isn't that right, Lucinda? She starts here tomorrow for the lunch hour service." Mrs. Petticock looked taken aback. "You're hiring someone from out of town, Mr. Cowslipper," she said with an accusatory tone of voice. "Do you know anything about this woman? I don't mean to be rude. No offence to you, young lady, of course, but Mr. Cowslipper, you can't just hire anyone off the street like this. It's not right, she said, shaking her head furiously. I'm the one doing the hiring, Mrs. Petticock, not you. I'd remind you of that. Besides, I'm a very good judge of character, and I'm delighted to give this young lady a job. This is my diner, Mrs. Petticock, and I hire whoever I wish, when I choose to hire them. Mrs. Petticock looked slightly annoyed. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Lucinda critically. Where are you from? She asked. And what are you doing in our small town? Enough, Mrs. Petticock, said Mr. Cowslipper, raising a hand. You ask too many prying, intrusive questions, Mrs. Petticock. Give the young lady a break, will you? Her life is none of your business. You're behaving like a police interrogator. It's incredibly rude. Is a lady not entitled to her personal privacy? I'm sorry, Mr. Cowslipper, but I completely disagree with you. You're always bringing in waifs and strays. You have a reputation for it, I'm afraid. It would be wise to check with this woman, well, about her background, for instance, before you just employ her randomly like this. You have absolutely no idea who she is. Where are you from? She asked Lucinda again. And more to the point, what are you doing in our small town? You haven't answered my questions yet. We hardly ever get strangers here, and when we do, they stick out like a sore thumb like you do. I can guess by your clothing. You've got to be a city girl. You're very fashionable. I'd rather not say, said Lucinda, but I do have my reasons for being here. But I'm not wanted by the police, if that's what you're asking. I'm trying to keep a low profile, that's all. If you must know, I'm a hard worker. Do you hear that, Mr. Cowslipper? She's just said she's trying to keep a low profile. Now you've got to ask yourself why. Why does she need to keep a low profile? It sounds dreadfully ominous, if you ask me. You heard her, Mrs. Petticock. Now enough of your insinuations, Mrs. Petticock, because they're not nice. Now why don't you go back to your table and quit bothering Lucinda here? I'll get some Tylenol sent over to your table for your thunderous headache you've acquired, said Mr. Cowslipper with an emphasis on the word thunderous. It was clear he didn't believe in the woman's fictitious headache for a moment. It was all a translucent ploy to get the lowdown on this new stranger in town. So there we are. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I promise you're really going to enjoy this story, so I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.